The desert airstrip was silent except for the faint hum of cicadas in the background. The sun had nearly set, painting the horizon with streaks of crimson and gold. And on the tarmac sat an F-16, lifeless, its sleek form strangely powerless, like a predator stripped of its strength. Technicians had gathered around it for hours, trying every procedure they knew. The jet refused to start. The mission was minutes away from being scrubbed. And inside the command tent, tension hung in the air so thick it was almost unbearable. That's when someone whispered a name. A name half of them had only heard in stories. A man they thought had long retired, who had once been called the ghost of the skies. He was not a general. He was not a colonel. He was just a mechanic. But his hands had touched more jets, saved more missions, and written more unspoken chapters of history than anyone else alive. And against the fading light, he walked toward the silent F-16. Alone. The man's name was Chief Master Sergeant David Harland. He was in his late 60s now, hair silver, eyes sharp as steel, carrying himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen war up close, yet carried no arrogance. Every step he took toward the jet seemed to silence the air around him. Young airmen froze. Senior officers exchanged glances but said nothing. "Is that him?" One whispered. "That's the guy." Another murmured. The rumor mill had painted him as almost mythical. Stories said he could fix an engine blindfolded, diagnose problems just by hearing the way a turbine coughed. Some even swore he once repaired a fighter mid-mission, saving pilots who would have never made it home. But to David, they were just stories. He never chased recognition. He lived by one principle: the jet must fly, no matter what. The mission that night was critical. Intelligence had confirmed an imminent threat. That F-16 wasn't just another aircraft, it was the only one within striking range that could intercept in time. Failure meant lives would be lost. And yet here it sat, silent, stubborn, and broken. David didn't waste time with introductions. He laid his old leather tool bag beside the nose wheel, crouched down, and pressed his palm against the fuselage like a doctor feeling for a pulse. "She's not dead," he muttered quietly. "She's just waiting." The younger technicians shuffled uncomfortably, exchanging doubtful looks. They had already checked everything: power supply, ignition, turbine blades, avionics. The manuals had been followed step by step. But David didn't open a manual. He didn't even glance at the diagnostic screens. Instead, he closed his eyes and listened. The silence stretched on until finally, one officer barked impatiently, "Chief, we don't have time for theatrics." David looked up, calm but firm. "Son, this jet doesn't speak to manuals. She speaks to hands that have bled for her. Give me a moment." The room fell silent again. He started small, running his hands over the panels, tapping gently as though listening to the echo inside. His fingers found a seam others had overlooked, a panel just slightly misaligned. He grabbed a screwdriver, loosened it, and peered inside. A faint spark, then nothing. David's eyes narrowed. "Fuel line relay," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Not broken, just forgotten." The technicians crowded closer, watching as his wrinkled hands moved with surprising steadiness. He pulled wires, tightened connections, adjusted valves with the kind of instinct that only came from decades of work. Each movement was deliberate, precise, almost surgical. One young airman whispered in awe, "It's like he's not fixing it, he's healing it." Minutes passed. Sweat glistened on David's brow, but his eyes never lost focus. He finally stepped back, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked at the pilot waiting nearby. "Try her now." The pilot hesitated. Everyone held their breath as he climbed into the cockpit, flipped the switches, and pressed the ignition. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a low rumble. A cough. And suddenly, the F-16 roared to life, its engine screaming across the tarmac like a beast awakened. The technicians froze. Officers stared wide-eyed. And the pilot grinned from ear to ear. The jet was alive. But David wasn't smiling. He stood with arms crossed, watching the engine stabilize, the afterburner flare, the instruments glow green. To him, this wasn't a miracle. It was duty. He had done this hundreds of times before, under gunfire, in deserts, on carriers at sea, even in hangars where silence was the only company. The officers approached him, one stammering, "Chief, how? How did you know?" David simply said, "Because I've listened to her heartbeat longer than I've listened to my own." And with that, he picked up his tool bag and began walking away. The F-16 took off into the night, mission saved, lives protected. As its roar faded into the distance, the men and women on the tarmac stood in stunned silence. One young technician finally whispered, "We'll never see someone like him again." But another, braver one, said softly, "Maybe we will. If we learn to care the way he does." And in that moment, they realized something. David Harland wasn't just fixing jets. He was passing on something far more valuable: respect, patience, and the belief that machines weren't just machines. They were lifelines. David disappeared into the shadows that night. He didn't wait for thanks, applause, or recognition. Legends don't need spotlights. They leave behind stories whispered by those who witness them. And on that desert airstrip, one story had just been born. If you were moved by this story, if you believe legends like David should never be forgotten, then like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories that keep the human spirit alive. Because sometimes, the greatest heroes aren't the ones flying the jets. They're the ones who make sure the jets can fly.